Welcome to CN Lit Lens. Engaging readings and captivating visuals of Chinese literature.
Chapter 1. In the autumn of the 14th year of Shunzi, Taiyuan was busier than usual. The Dingyu County examination had just passed, and many scholars did not go home. They waited in the city eagerly for the results. They threw all the books of sages behind their heads and enjoyed themselves for a few days. The singing halls, wine shops, and tea houses were all full of scholars wearing fairy skirts and feather fans, and were elegant and suave. Or they went to visit the Jin temple, climb Mount Long, seek monks, and learn about Taoism, and sing poems and drink wine together. They were so happy. Half a mile east of the main gate of the Confucian temple, there was a King Yunnan, where a scholar named Chen Tingjing lived. He was from Zizhou, Shaanxi, and was only 20 years old. He was the only one who rarely went out. He liked to stay in the backyard of the inn, reading and playing the zither all day long, and relaxing by himself. He never put down his choni chen. There was an ancient locust tree in the backyard, with a tall trunk like clouds. Every morning, the servant Dashin, without paying attention to anything else, first took out the choni chen and placed it on the stone table under the ancient locust tree. Chen Tingjing had already washed and dressed, and was reading aloud in the courtyard. The shopkeeper got up early, and he first heard Chen Tingjing reading, and then he heard the sound of the piano. He was very curious. Others who had passed the autumn examination were like donkeys that had been unloaded from the mill, and they had all those who were drinking, fighting cocks, and visiting brothels outside. There were always scholars. Only this young Master Chen stayed in the inn every day, either reading Confucius's words or reading mountains and flowing water. Dashin was only 13 years old. After all, he was very playful. After breakfast every day, when he saw the young master starting to read and play the piano, he would sneak out to hang out. He always liked to get together with many people. Wherever there was cockfighting, storytelling, or quarreling, he would go in to take a look. He forgot the time while playing, and suddenly thought that it was getting late, so he ran back to the inn. Dashin saw that the young master was not angry, so he told him everything he heard and saw. Not long after Dashin left the house that day, he ran back quickly, regardless of the rules, and shouted loudly, "Master, you passed, you passed." Chen Tingjing's piano stopped abruptly, and he turned around and asked, "What place?" Dashin touched his head and said, "How many? I didn't count." Chen Tingjing suddenly stood up. "You didn't count. It must not be the first," Dashin said. "Master, it's amazing to be a juror. How can you always get the first place?" Chen Tingjing sat down again and bowed his head for a long time. He thought that he took the board's exam in the 8th year of Shunzi and was admitted to Luan Prefecture School, and he got the first place. Chen Tingjing was only 14 years old that year. He went to the exam with his father, but his father failed. He had been taught by his father since he was a child, but in the exam his father was not as good as his son. Although his father felt ashamed, he always liked to tell this story to others as a good story. In a few years, Chen Tingjing's name spread throughout Shaanxi and was known to all the scholars. Dashin was like he had done something wrong, and he didn't dare to say much, and stood aside with his hands down. Dashin followed the young master when he was 10 years old. He knew that the young master didn't like to talk much and couldn't tell his temper, but Dacian was afraid of him and was very careful in what he said and did. Chen Tingjing suddenly stood up and walked out without saying a word. Dacian hurriedly sent the Qing to the guest room, went out to catch up with Chen Tingjing, and followed behind with his head down. On the 8-character wall outside the Confucian temple, where the list was posted, there were many people gathered, and it was noisy. Under the list stood two soldiers with swords, with dull faces and straight eyes, like to clay Buddhas. Chen Tingjing walked up and heard several failed scholars complaining that the examiner took the money, and the drunkards passed the exam, and the Confucian temple became a temple of the god of wealth. Several scholars rolled up their sleeves and waved their fists, shouting that they wanted to see the examiner. Chen Tingjing didn't recognize them, so he didn't bother to say hello and just looked for his name from beginning to end. He finally saw his name, ranked 28th. He looked up at the top of the list and saw that the first place winner was Zhu Shigui. He deliberately asked Zhu Shigui, "I have heard of his great name for a long time." It turned out that all the scholars knew that there was a Zhu Shigui who took the exam this year. He had written the word Chong above the word Gui. Everyone called him Zhu Zikong behind his back. This joke had already spread among the scholars. No one took this Jew seriously. They just thought he was there to accompany the exam. Who knew that he actually won the first place? At this time, a young man from a wealthy family rode up on horseback, glanced at the imperial edict with a smug look, tilted his head and looked around, then glanced at Chen Tingjing. "I am Zhu Shigui, and I am honored to be the first in the provincial examination, which is called Jiyuan. I am sorry to offend you all." Chen Tingjing looked up and asked, "Are you the Zhu Shigui who can't even write his name?" Before Chen Tingjing could continue, someone spoke up. "Zhu Zikong is actually the first in the provincial examination. We Shaxi people are so glorious." Chen Tingjing snorted and said, "You are such a fat worm." Zhu Shigui didn't seem to be angry and asked with a smile, "Who are you?" Chen Tingjing bowed and said, "I am Chen Tingjing from Zizhou." Zhu Shigui sneered again and said, "Chen Tingjing, wait for me to see. Ah, you almost failed the exam, and you still dare to speak in front of the champion?" Chen Tingjing said angrily, "Zhu Zikong, you are so shameless." Zhu Shigui laughed and said, "From today on, Zhu Zikong will become Zhu Zilong." Chen Tingjing said, "Zhu Zikong, you have also become a jurand, and there will be no scholars in the world." Zhu Shigui suddenly looked fierce. "Chen Tingjing, you dare to insult the champion? I will teach you the rules today." Zhu Shigui raised his whip and was about to hit him. Dacian was quick-witted and grabbed Zhu Shigui and pulled him off the horse. Although Dacian was small, he was agile, and Zhu Shigui was caught off guard and fell down. The scholars took advantage of the chaos to vent their anger and rushed to Zhu Shigui. Zhu Shigui also followed others, but he was helpless because of the large number of people, so he could only circle around the crowd anxiously. The two clay Buddhas under the list came to life and wanted to persuade them, but they couldn't get close. Dacian was smart. Seeing the chaos, he pulled Chen Tingjing out slowly. Suddenly, there was a snap, and a melon hit the imperial list. With the melon as the first step, stones and soul rained down on the imperial list. Before long, There was not a single complete word on the imperial list. A stone bounced back and hit Chen Jing on the shoulder. Dacian hurriedly pulled Chen Jing out and said, "Master, let's go back. Be careful not to hit your head." The more Chen Jing thought about it, the more he felt suffocated. He went back to the inn and yelled at Dacian to pack his luggage and go home today. Dacian said that the luggage could be packed, and he would leave tomorrow, and he had to hire a carriage. Chen Jing was filled with resentment, and the shadows of those examiners kept coming to his mind. Before the exam, several examiners, all from the capital, rode in open sedan chairs and paraded through the streets, and the scholars lined the streets to pay homage. This is an ancient system, very solemn. A scholar who didn't know what was going on actually went forward to submit a letter, but was driven away by the examiner. Seeing this, the scholars said that the examiners were all stern and were not afraid of anyone trying to curry favor with them. Who knew that it would end up like this? After a long time, there was a commotion outside the inn, and the shopkeeper came over and said, "Nowadays, the scholars are outrageous. Really outrageous." Chen Jing didn't ask what was going on, but ran to the street to see. It turned out that some scholars were carrying the statue of Confucius in a parade, and the statue was actually wearing the costume of the god of wealth. From now on, we won't worship Confucius, but only the god of wealth. What's the point of studying? Earn more money and still be afraid of not passing the imperial examination? The scholars shouted and waved their fists. The streets were full of people watching the excitement. All of them were stunned. An old man cried out, "You are committing a sin. You can't be so absurd. You will be punished." Chen Jing knew that this matter was no joke. He stepped forward and pulled an acquaintance and gently advised, "You can't do this. If the government catches you, you will be beheaded." The man said, "Fame and honor are life for scholars. If we lose our fame and honor, we will die. Why should we be afraid of losing our heads? At least you have passed the exam. Just don't join in the fun." Seeing that no one listened, Chen Jing followed behind and only looked for acquaintances to persuade them. Chen Jing walked behind and didn't think about going back. He was like a demon. His mind was empty and hot. The scholars carried the statue of Confucius in a big circle on the street and returned to the Confucian temple. The statue of Confucius was carried away from the Minglan Hall of the Confucian temple, and now it was carried back. The statue of Confucius was put back in its original place, but it was very funny because it was wearing the costume of the god of wealth. Someone grabbed a few coins and threw them in front of the statue of Confucius. Suddenly, fierce shouts came from outside the Confucian temple. When he looked back, dozens of yamen runners and soldiers rushed in with long sticks. The yamen runners and soldiers hit anyone on the head with sticks without any reason, knocked them to the ground, and tied them up. How could the scholar have seen such a scene? He was scared to death. Those who were quick fled away, while those who dared to stand out were beaten to pieces. Chen Jing thought he was fine and stood there motionless. People didn't care so much. Chen Jing and the 7 people who didn't run away were all tied up. The man was arrested by Wu Dai, the governor of Shaanxi. He had just had lunch and was taking a nap under the grape trellis in the back yamen. Suddenly, someone came to report that the scholar was carrying the statue of Confucius and making a fuss on the street, and even put the clothes of the god of wealth on Confucius. Wu Dai was very annoyed that he was disturbed when he was sleepy. He asked a few questions and shouted to arrest the man while shouting for the examiner to come to the yamen to talk. Wu Dai cursed a few times, changed his clothes, and went to the signing room. After waiting for a long time, the yamen runner brought in a list. Mr. Futai, these are the people we arrested, a total of 7. Among them, only Chen Tingjing passed the exam, and the others failed. Wu Dai glanced at the list and said, "Is it the prodigy Chen Tingjing from Zizhou? Why is he joining in the fun?" At this time, another yamen runner came in to reply, saying that the examiners, Mr. Zhang and Mr. Xiang, had arrived and were waiting in the second hall. Wu Dai was not happy and was not afraid of them hearing him, so he said, "Why are they waiting in the second hall? Are they waiting for me to invite them? Tell them to come to the signing room." The yamen runner went out in response. Not long after, the chief examiner Zhang Gongming and the deputy examiner Xiang Qingxing entered the signing room. Everyone knew that something had happened, so they didn't care about being polite, and their faces were not very good. Wu Dai didn't look at anyone, lowered his head, and asked coldly, "Tell me, what's going on?" Zhang Gongming looked at Xiang Qingxing, wanting him to speak first, but Xiang Qingxing just pretended to be confused. So Zhang Gongming had to say, "We are ordered to select scholars, and we abide by the rules and regulations without any partiality. It is pure slander to say that we accepted bribes. Those scholars who failed the exam are ignorant and only know how to make trouble." Xiang Qingxing then agreed. "What Lord Zhang said is very true. Those who failed the exam made the provincial school a mess, and even put the clothes of the god of wealth on Confucius on the stage." Wu Dai didn't wait for Xiang Qingxing to finish and flew into a rage. "You are all examiners appointed by the emperor and sent from the capital. If the court investigates, I will lose my official hat and you will lose your heads." After all, Zhang Gongming was the minister of rights, and he couldn't stand Wu Dai's black face. So he said, "Sir, I, Zhang, can swear to heaven that if there is any uncleanness, there are national laws. However, the incident happened in Shanxi after all, and it is difficult for you to shirk your responsibility. It is useless to get angry at us. We are grasshoppers on the same vine, and we should bear with each other." Wu Dai sighed to the sky and shook his head, saying, "I am so unlucky." "Well, you quickly draft a memorial and report the whole story to the court. First, make it clear that the scholars are making trouble. After we have inquired about the case, we will report the details. It is impossible to hide it." The matter was urgent, and they did not bother to ask the clerk to write for them. The 3 of them gathered in the signing room, and they quickly drafted the memorial. Wu Dai read the memorial again and again, but he was still worried and said, "Sir Zhang, you are the literary attendant of the emperor. You have to be careful with the text. The more appropriate, the better." Zhang Gongming said a few humble words, raised his hand to take the manuscript, and repeatedly considered it. The 3 of them felt that every word was true, so they officially wrote it down. The memorial was still on the way, and Wu Dai did not wait for the imperial edict to come down. He first questioned Chen Tingjing and others for a few times, and then locked up Zhu Shigui. Wu Dai wanted to act as soon as possible in order to clear himself. Zhu Shigui did not confess, but Wu Dai guessed that he must have bribed someone. Zhang Gongming and Chen Tingjing must have a lot to do with this case, but the court did not issue a word. So Wu Dai did not dare to do anything to them. It would be better to lock up Zhu Shigui, and it would be seen that he had a clear mind afterwards. Zhu Shigui was a fool. Although he refused to say a word in court, he boasted in prison, saying, "Even if I, Zhu, gave money, I will lose my position as a juror if the matter is investigated. My Zhu family has thousands of acres of fertile land, hundreds of carriages and horses, and enjoys endless wealth and glory. What about you? You will be beheaded if you make trouble in the government school and insult Confucius." About 10 days later, the emperor saw the memorial and immediately summoned Soni, Obo, and other ministers. That day, Soni and Obo agreed to meet the emperor together. But when they arrived outside the Qing palace, the eunuch on duty only pursed his lips quietly and did not summon them. Suddenly, there was a crisp sound inside, and I knew that the emperor had dropped the teacup. Several ministers had been waiting outside the palace, but they pretended not to hear anything. Obo looked up at Soni, and Soni only looked down at the gold bricks on the ground. In the Qing palace, the eunuchs crouched and went to clean up carefully. The emperor couldn't stand anyone at this moment, and he kept shouting, "Get out!" The eunuch quickly picked up the porcelain pieces on the ground and bowed to leave. The eunuch Wu Liangfu bravely said, "Your Majesty, Soni, Obo, and other ministers are waiting outside." The emperor roared, "I don't want to see them. The day before yesterday, they told me that something happened in the Jiangnan imperial examination. The scholars beat the examiners and made a big fuss in the government school. Yesterday, they told me that something happened in the Shaanxi imperial examination. The statue of Confucius wore the clothes of the god of wealth. Today, you want to tell me what happened?" Wu Liangfu didn't dare to say that the ministers were all summoned by the emperor, and only said, "They are here to ask for your order on how to deal with the Shaanxi imperial examination case." The emperor smiled coldly, which was very scary. "I knew it. They will collect the silver, and I will do the killing," Wu Liangfu said. "Everyone in the world knows that the emperor is wise and kind."